you actually come from a physics background and are really well acquainted with a topic that's pretty interesting, which is the storage of energy. And right now we are seeing oil be at an all-time low, and people trying to figure out like how much of this can we get out of buy from these people on the markets and shove it into storage. And so I'm interested in talking with you. You one time built a concept for a grid-sized battery, meaning not just like a battery large enough to power a car or a house, but actually how would you build a battery if you were going to charge it for an entire city? So you know something about, and those patents are now owned by large, Google owns them now?
Yeah, so I'm a physicist. My background originally was in optics. And so I was an optical engineer for a couple of years, and then I went to grad school. And while I was doing physics in grad school, while I was there, I sort of figured out I wanted to work on energy security. And so I went to the Department of Energy after I graduated, so after I got my PhD, and I went to an agency called the Advanced Research Project Agency Energy. It was a new agency modeled off of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, but so funding high risk, high reward projects, new technologies in energy that could really kind of change the trajectory of where our country is headed. And so while I was there, I'm really familiar with oil prices going up and down. I helped start a program to fund at-home refueling systems for natural gas cars and much cheaper tanks for cars, so that instead of like a plug-in plug-in electric car, you could drive to your house and have, if you have natural gas for your oven, you could have a small, cheap compressor in your house that would fill up your car with natural gas every night. And the tanks wouldn't have to be cylinders or spheres like normal. Like it wouldn't have to fill up all your trunk. It could kind of be weird shaped things that could fit in the spaces in the car where you could, like a normal gas tank is like a really weird shape. So it was just interesting though, like when we funded that program, and I wasn't the program director in charge. I was an ARPA-E fellow, and so I helped kind of find the space and figure out what we needed to fund. We put $30 million into 15 companies doing different things in this space that we thought could really make a difference. And the payback was like, if we could make this work, like these cars would pay back within 2 years, like because oil was so much more expensive than natural gas, because shale had just sort of come online. And 3 years later, like oil prices just crashed, and like all those projects got wiped out. Like the economics just did not work at all. And so a similar thing is, I mean, that's what's happening right now with oil prices so low is, well, it's putting a lot of pressure on all sorts of energy technologies. And so you go back to the grid scale battery. So I left ARPA-E and started a company with a professor at Stanford. He's a Nobel Prize winning physicist named Robert Laughlin. He invented a battery that takes electricity in and converts it into, it basically stores it in by heating up a molten salt to a higher temperature. And that's where the energy is stored. And I started the company with him and another ARPA-E fellow named Phil Rochelle. And this is this battery. So if you want to use renewable power, it's intermittent. So sun is only outputting during the day, and wind only outputs when it's windy. And so you need a battery to make it dispatchable. It needs to be a very cheap battery. Unlike the battery in your phone where you need it to be lightweight, a stationary battery just needs to be cheap. So instead of like energy per kilogram, like you need in a car or a phone, you need energy per dollar. That's like sort of the metric that people care about. And so Bob invented this battery that works sort of like the smallest scale is maybe 1,000 houses. And so we worked on that for a couple of years together. We started a company together, and then
wait, the smallest. So you're saying you start to get efficiencies of scale once you get over 1,000.
That's sort of the very smallest you could make this battery and make it sort of make economic sense.
Where does it really start paying off?
Like a city of 1 million, say. You know, it's really, this is like a city-sized battery, like Los Angeles, San Francisco, St. Louis, like the power company for your big city in your area this would be the sort of battery that they would put in. And
this would be so you could go out and, for example, harvest sunlight in the middle of summer, and then store that energy for later?
No. Okay. That's seasonal storage. That is a whole other ballgame. This is daily storage.
Okay.
Or maybe like for a week. Like, sort of those sort of things. But not, you need something else even an order of magnitude cheaper than this thermal battery if you want to do the seasonal storage.
Okay.
I don't think there's a great solution for that yet.
So you've got wind and it happens to be blowing right now, and you can store it away in a battery, and if the wind goes down, you can still power everything, and you can kind of generally cycle between those.
Or wind is blowing in Texas. They've got a lot of wind in Texas, and if the grid is connected in the right way, you could put a battery next to your city and buy that, for example.
Oh, wow. So what goes on when oil prices?
Sorry. Texas is not connected to the rest of the grid in the normal way, but that's like sort of the dream of where we're headed, is that the grids will get better interconnected. It's some people's dream, not everyone's dream. But if that happens, then you could site batteries wherever is convenient for the grid, and you would be able to use more domestic power, essentially.
So, I mean, the difference between what you're talking about, a battery that is molten salt, and oil is, right? Oil is storage of energy that you can transport. You can do it in tankers and you can do it in trucks. But the challenge is you can't just set it in a field. Like, you actually have to have tanks and reservoirs to be able to hold it. What should we know about energy storage that maybe the regular person wouldn't? I mean, the most storage I have at my house is a 5-gallon gas can.
Yeah. So you almost, from a physics perspective, it's hard to get more energy dense than liquid fuel, especially in something that you can pour and move around in such an easy way as a liquid fuel. Besides nuclear power, but chemically, it's almost like, it's a fuel. It's designed to store energy, a lot of energy in a small volume. Though, to be perfectly honest, like lots of things have that same energy density. Your butter in your fridge has the same energy density roughly as the gas in your car, because it's all hydrocarbons.
Oh, wow. And we eat a just different kind of hydrocarbon then?
It's a different length of the hydrocarbon. Yeah, that's right.
Holy cow.
And different kinks and whatever, but it's the same carbons and hydrogens, and and you add oxygens and you have carbohydrates. And so that's sort of, all of those are kind of related chemicals. I'm trying to remember your original question, Vance. I think we went off on a...
Well, so I want to talk about the storage of oil. Like right now, you're watching the price of oil go way, way down. What do you think? How does this change the world in ways that we might not expect?
I'm actually not thinking about it a lot from the United States perspective, because our shale oil is easier to ramp up and down. You can respond to price better than you can if you invest billions of dollars in, where you have to like pump the oil out of the ground in a conventional oil play. And so as prices go down, I think the U.S. it's easier for us to turn off our production of oil from shale. It's not easy, but it's easier than other countries would have. And so actually, I don't. So the way you store energy, oil is the U.S. has a domestic or a security, like national security related reserve, where they have essentially caverns underground that they pump oil underground. And I don't know, maybe they're filling it right now. I'm not sure. It would make sense to right now. The price is good, but who knows? Maybe they were full already. I don't know.
So I want to go back to this thing about being able to turn these things on and off, and it's not as difficult. I can imagine that if you're doing offshore oil drilling in the North Sea and you turn that thing off and you evacuate all those people off, you fire them so you don't have the employees there. I can imagine that bringing that thing back online is difficult, and those people might have jobs somewhere else, and so you can't just go hire anybody off the street. But
you don't turn those off.
So that's not the case then with the shale oil. That this is a different thing. You don't need as much expertise, or how can you turn these on and off easily?
So a lot of times when you find shale oil and the gas that comes with it, you can sort of stage when you frack. So you can decide, like, based on the prices, how much should I frack? Normally you want to frack the whole thing while you're there, but then you can cap it. You don't have to get it out. And I keep going to say, like, I'm not an expert on this, but this is all stuff that I've sort of picked up, and I may be getting some things wrong here, but you can I think you can cap the wells is one thing. And also a lot of it, a lot of the oil and gas comes out right away when you start producing. And so by controlling the rate that you are fracking new wells essentially controls the rate at which you get the oil out of the ground. And so, there's a price, and as the price goes up and down, the number of drill rigs out there changes. And so as the price goes down, companies are going to suffer. They will, they won't have the same amount of cash flow that they had before. So the price will go down, the number of drill rigs will go down, and the amount of output will go down. And then eventually, the things will stabilize, and then the prices will start going up again. And so
it's particularly stands out to me because I was flipping through Twitter this morning, actually right before we got on this call, and somebody was talking about pink slips are going out to oil workers in the Texas, I think even Oklahoma area. And so it was like, man, okay, yeah, so that's tough.
And this honestly is where we really should have Peter Zeihan talk about this, because he knows a lot more about it than I do. But there are a couple of the shale basins where the price is much cheaper. And so what's probably going to happen is assets will tend to move towards those areas, and people will have to move to those places. So some of them are very cheap, and then a lot of them, when oil prices were really high, we could export everywhere for shale, and a lot of those are not economic at the low prices today. But some of them are economic, and so probably what will happen is drill rigs and people and personnel will tend to concentrate in those places where it actually is still cheap.
Well, it's kind of interesting to think. So, my buddy Dwayne Faber, dfaber84 on Twitter, he's a dairy farmer, but because of the way that he does milk trading, right, he has to think about futures and so he has a very unique view, and he wanted to know about which company should I invest in. Because if I had invested $20,000 into Shell 20 years ago, it'd be worth gangbusters. It'd be awesome. I would have killed it. Which one of those should I do it in now? And as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking you want to figure out who is going to be the more adaptable to have their capital wherever these basins genuinely are the cheapest. Like the margin on how to get that gas out of there is going to be super, super valuable over the longer term.
And then on top of that, it's not just the oil and gas producing companies, but the ones that use that as inputs. So the U.S. is going to just have a competitive advantage because we are going to have really cheap natural gas compared to anybody else for 10 years at least before anyone can catch up. And so that's enough time that chemical things that use plastics companies and whatnot, those companies will start moving back here and will be using those cheap inputs.